Hello dear viewers, welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. In today's episode, we will analyze the situation in the Ukrainian conflict as of December 6, 2025. The day has been filled with significant events, so let's proceed directly to the analysis. So let's turn to the ground situation, starting with the Zaporizhzhia front. Today we have made changes to the cartography in the area of the settlement of Mala Tokmachka. I remind you that yesterday video materials from the territory of the former Women's Correctional Facility appeared in the information space. These recordings clearly show Ukrainian servicemen positioned in the southeastern sector of Mala Tokmachka. This incident was recorded precisely in the indicated location, and yesterday we naturally pondered the need for cartographic clarifications to display the advancement of Ukrainian troops to this zone. Today, certain impartial cartographic resources completed this task. Accordingly, we followed their example and correction methodology, coloring the northern and northwestern sectors of the settlement of Mala Tokmachka, with the color designating territories under the control of Ukrainian armed formations. Information is circulating in information channels about the Ukrainian side conducting several effective counterattacks in the Mala Tokmachka area, thanks to which Ukrainian forces managed to regain partial dominance. The situation around the former Women's Correctional Colony remains uncertain. In accordance with the current configuration of cartographic data, the territory of the former Women's Colony is listed under Russian military control. However, in reality, the situation may differ from this. We continue moving toward the settlement of Huliaipol, where intense clashes for the city are unfolding. Russian military units, if we rely on current information, the latest cartographic changes from various analysts and specialized services have entered the territory of the settlement of Huliaipol in combat mode from the northern direction, from the northeastern direction, and from the eastern direction. Today, such information is disseminated predominantly by neutral and pro-Russian oriented analysts. At the present moment, this information has not yet received confirmation from pro-Ukrainian cartographers. However, this is most likely simply a matter of time before sources from the Ukrainian side acknowledge the fact of combat clashes directly for Huliaipol. In addition to this, today several pro-Russian analytical sources disseminated information that Dakhnaya Street and Naberezhnaya Street have already passed under the control of Russian armed formations. Consequently, if we sum up, we can already assert that approximately about 60% of precisely the eastern half of Huliaipol, that territory of Huliaipol located on the Russian bank of the Hychel River, is already under Russian military control. And if we consider Huliaipol in its entirety, this constitutes approximately 10 to 15% of the total area. We move to the Pokrovsk direction. Today in this sector, we have also carried out significant and fundamental corrections, based on data posted by Ukrainian information resources and independent cartographic platforms. Before delving into details, I suggest comparing the cartographic state between dates for greater clarity. This is how the cartographic situation was displayed just yesterday, December 5, 2025. We continued to designate Mirnograd as a zone under the control of Ukrainian armed forces. However, today we are already eliminating this color designation and completely removing any color marking from the territory of Mirnograd, thus demonstrating and declaring that at the current stage, Mirnograd no longer belongs to Ukrainian armed forces. The very fact of presence on the territory of Mirnograd does not indicate that Mirnograd is controlled by the AFU, and that in the foreseeable future the city will not be taken definitively. In the current period, the situation in Mirnograd resembles the situation in the city of Vuhledar in the final days of combat operations on that territory. We observed an analogous picture in the city of Mariupol in the final days, when Ukrainian military formations were pressed on the territory of the Azovstal plant, after which capitulation followed. Today the situation is similar. Russian troops are actively advancing from the southern direction, from the eastern direction, from the northern direction. Today Russian information sources report very fortified positions in the area of the settlements of Rivne and Zvitle. These are the western peripheral districts of Mirnograd. The Russian army systematically carries out strikes using aviation means and artillery weaponry on the urban territory. Moreover, there is already a sufficient amount of evidence and confirmations that the Russian army completely dominates the territory between Pokrovsk, Highway T0515, and Olympiyska Street. Today, this information is indirectly confirmed by neutral cartographic platforms. These are the types of corrections they are producing. And in addition, today this video was posted by the Ukrainian side. And in these frames, we can observe a series of FPV drone attacks on Russian airborne units that are fortifying in these strongpoints. And these frames confirm that the encirclement has completely closed. And not just closed, but what is most significant, a sufficient buffer zone has already been formed. At the present moment, the distance of this narrow section between Highway T0515 and Olimpijska Street from the AFU side already constitutes approximately 4 kilometers. This is a sufficient distance for holding this bridgehead for a very lengthy period and repelling all probable counterstrikes from the AFU side. On the Dobropilya direction, the Russian army is gradually approaching the railway line running between Rodinske and Dorozhny. Today, this information receives confirmation from a number of neutral cartographic platforms. At the current moment, the Russian army is concentrated on completely clearing Rodinske, receiving an official statement about this from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, and completely clearing the railway line between the two settlements. As soon as this is realized, as soon as Russian troops manage to accumulate forces in this direction, then advancement will immediately begin in the direction of Velika Bilozerka, both from the northern side and from the southern side. The city will be enveloped by a pincer maneuver with gradual displacement of Ukrainian military formations further to the northwest, in the direction of Dobropilya. Next, we move to the Kostiantynivka sector. As you can notice, today no reports came from this direction. Combat clashes continue. Today, personally, I anticipated the possible appearance of news from the Ministry of Defense regarding the settlements of Verolyubivka and Popasne. Nevertheless, no information was published. I remind you that yesterday the settlement called Bezimena passed under the control of Russian troops, and overall a very threatening situation formed for AFU units on the territory of the settlement of Kostiantynivka. On the Siversk sector, the main events at the present moment are occurring in the area of the city of Siversk. Today the map has again undergone changes. It has already been modified over the last several days. This is how the map looked as recently as December 4th. On December 5th, pro-Ukrainian information resources report clearing of the eastern outlying districts of the city of Siversk. And already on December 6th, information arrives that Russian troops have advanced into the depth of the city of Siversk and are gradually approaching the railway line that divides the city into two halves. In the nearest perspective, in all probability, completely all of the eastern part of Siversk will pass under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The city of Siversk at the current moment can no longer be held realistically due to the fact that both the northern branch of Highway T0513 and the southern branch are already under complete fire domination. And if we speak about the southern section of this road, it is also under physical control in the area of the settlement of Sviatopokrivske. On the Lyman direction, no changes have been recorded. Next, we move to the Kupiansk sector. Today, additional materials are arriving regarding the Ukrainian counter-offensive that started approximately at the end of November, beginning of December. Today, a number of neutral cartographic platforms supplements the situation in this direction, and according to current news, Ukrainian troops continued the counter-offensive precisely on the western coast of the Oskil River, with the goal, apparently, of restoring dominance at least in this section of the city. Today, based on various cartographic platforms, another small micro-district is being colored in favor of the armed forces of Ukraine. However, hasty conclusions should not be drawn in this situation. The Ukrainian side over the last several months has repeatedly conducted counterattacks. There was a counterattack in Kupiansk. At the present moment, it is still continuing. A counterattack in the Shakov area that failed. Counterattacks in the Mirnograd, Pokrovsk area that failed. Counterattacks in the Ivanivka and Novopavlivka area that are still continuing but also may possibly fail in the nearest perspective. Consequently, the strike in the Kupiansk area apparently more resembles some kind of media operation, or possibly a strike with the goal of unblocking 15 battalions that found themselves in a difficult situation on the Russian side of the Oskil River. Daily, the Ukrainian side attempts to break out of the encirclement in this sector. but everything that approaches the Oskil River is immediately eliminated by FPV drone operators of the Russian Federation. And with this, the frontline summary is complete, dear viewers. Now let's examine what is happening in the political arena. Radical transformations are outlined in the United States' approach to ensuring its own security. At the very least, precisely such statements and declarations are contained in the new U.S. National Security Strategy. What specifically do they consist of? How does this affect Washington's allies in Europe and their current confrontation with Russia? On December 5th, the U.S. National Security Strategy was made public. 29 pages of text reflect the vision of Donald Trump and his supporters from among the non-isolationists regarding new priorities and goals of American policy. The principles of the document, emphasizing non-interference and the America First principle, mark a sharp change compared to the previous NSS of 2022, which outlined the role of the United States in strengthening democracy and maintaining peace under the existing world order, writes the American Council on Foreign Relations. The new doctrine essentially renounces its predecessors. After the end of the Cold War, those shaping foreign policy convinced themselves that permanent American domination over the entire world would best serve the interests of our country. They bet too much on globalization and so-called free trade, which devastated our middle class and industrial base on which America's military and economic superiority was founded, the document states. In essence, Washington is abandoning the principle of interference in the affairs of the entire world. Strategy must evaluate, sort, and prioritize. Not every country, region, issue, or cause, however important it may be, can be in the focus of American strategy. The goal of foreign policy should be the protection of key national interests, the document's authors continue. Among such interests are identified protection from illegal migration, nuclear deterrence, building a powerful economy with an industrial base, as well as protecting Americans from external invasion, whether military or ideological. The main region for the USA is named as Latin America, where the National Security Strategy proclaims the reanimation of the Monroe Doctrine. In other words, Washington's domination in one specific region, where local authorities must cooperate with Americans in protecting the national and economic interests of the USA, and external countries should not interfere. We will not allow competitors located outside our hemisphere, that is China, as well as Russia and Iran, note from VZGLID, to deploy forces or create any other threat to us, or to challenge control over assets strategically important to us in our hemisphere, the document states. The second most important region is named as Asia, where the goal is proclaimed to be containing China, that very one which, allegedly, grew due to the mistakes of the United States, which allowed the Chinese to pull finances and industry from America to themselves. The doctrine speaks of the necessity of starting a trade war with China, as well as pulling in all American allies, whose combined GDP constitutes $35 trillion, and together with our $30 trillion in total, makes up more than half the world economy, to oppose Beijing's predatory economic measures. In turn, Europe, which until recently was considered precisely the key region for the USA, was described in the strategy with very disparaging characteristics. Moreover, this concerns not only the reduction of its share in the world economy from 25% of global GDP in the 90s to 14% now, but also the prospect of destruction of its civilization as such. The main reason is named as the actions of the European Union, which destroys political freedom and sovereignty, conducts ineffective migration policy, introduces censorship and undermines freedom of speech, suppresses political opposition, reduces the birth rate. And if these trends continue, the continent will change beyond recognition within 20 years. And it is far from certain that some European countries will maintain sufficiently strong economies and armed forces to remain reliable allies for us, the document states. However, the most unpleasant thing for the EU is perhaps 2 points of the doctrine. First, the document describes not only the uselessness, but also the harmfulness of European sanctions against the Russian Federation for Europe itself. The German chemical industry is building some of the largest processing plants in China because it needs Russian gas, which is impossible to obtain at home, the document states. And all this became a consequence of unrealistic policy conducted by European officials and national minority governments that trample the basic principles of democracy to suppress the opposition. According to the document's authors, the European majority wants peace, but this desire of theirs is not being realized due to their government's undermining of democratic processes. The document essentially calls Brussels and the leaders of key European countries enemies of ordinary European voters. The director of research at the Valdai Club Foundation, Fyodor Lukyanov, called the new American national security strategy's approach to Europe revolutionary. The call to cultivate resistance among European countries to Europe's current trajectory is not simply interference in internal affairs, but inciting revolutionary, rebellious sentiments, and with the completely frank goal of opening European markets to American goods and services, the expert noted. At the same time, NATO expansion, according to the American strategy, ceases to be perceived as something natural. Lukyanov called the intention to prevent the corresponding practice, drawing a line under the entire tradition after the Cold War. Regarding security guarantees for Europeans, Washington is in no hurry to make promises that it will stand shoulder to shoulder with the European Union in a war against Russia, which Brussels talks about so much. At the same time, it is indicated that, in a few decades, a number of NATO member countries will be populated mostly by non-Europeans. And the question is whether they will view their place in the world and in alliance with the USA the way those who signed the NATO Charter viewed it. There will be no protection because, in general, protection is needed not from Russia, but from European fears. The document states that many Europeans view Russia as an existential threat, not that it actually is one, and that the USA will essentially undertake to correct this error. Managing Europe's relations with Russia will require significant diplomatic participation by the USA, both to restore conditions of strategic stability throughout the Eurasian space and to reduce the risk of conflict between Russia and European states, the strategy declares. In other words, Washington denies the European Union the sovereign right to build relations with Moscow, because Brussels has not matured to this level. Instead of engaging in the protection of Europeans, and if we consider this from the USA's perspective, Europe as an asset of American foreign policy, the leadership of the European Union is not simply preparing for a suicidal war with Russia, but is also provoking Moscow out of nowhere. After all, there is not a word in the entire document that Moscow poses any real threat whatsoever to European civilization. If we look at the spirit and text of the US national security strategy, its authors stopped one step short of calling the EU leadership and leaders of a number of national countries anti-popular, illegitimate usurpers and occupiers. That is, those from me whom Europeans must rid themselves in order to remain American allies, or perhaps to survive at all. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes. All the best to you.